Change is inevitable. Mutation is universal. It's bound to happen. There's so many opportunities for errors to occur along the way that variation will exist in all things, including species, cells, organisms. Genetic variation makes evolution possible. When that change is inherited, the accumulation of differences in genes or DNA segments can serve as the groundwork, the prerequisite for natural selection. Whether or not that variation is heritable is chance. Did the mutation occur in germline cells, in sperm or egg gametes? Genetic variation can come about in a number of ways. New genes and allele forms can arise by single nucleotide mutations. These mutations can be point mutations, a single letter that change, and the outcome of these mutations can be harmless, silent, or provide an advantage or disadvantage. Mutation just means different. It is ultimately the functionality and the environment that will determine whether or not it's suited. New genes and alleles can also arise through chromosomal mutations. Polyploidy, altering of the chromosome number, changes such as translocation, inversion, or deletions. With chromosomal mutations, large changes are generally harmful, but small segments of duplication or deletion may be less harmful, may lead to new functions. The example here is dog snout length. It varies based upon how many copies of a particular gene was inherited. The longer the snout, the more copies they have. The shorter the snout, the less. Too short can be harmful. We know that pugs and Boston Terriers, French bulldogs have trouble breathing, but on the whole, just different. Genetic variation can also come about through sex. Meiosis can shuffle existing alleles into new combinations through crossover events. And the actual act of sex combines one sperm to one egg. This is a 1 in 1.2 billion unique possibility of variations. Natural selection describes the differential success in reproduction amongst individuals with certain traits, and therefore their alleles are more likely to be passed on to the next generation in greater proportion. Another way to think about this is nature is selecting who's best suited to thrive, survive, and procreate. In evolution, we describe survival of the fittest, but it's important to recognize that fit doesn't mean stronger, faster, smarter. Fit refers to an organism's ability to reproduce. Compared to the average, how much more likely are they to have offspring, and how much more likely are their offspring likely to survive? It's a ratio, not a raw number. So in this story here, we've got an overproduction of deer or caribou, and every species tends to produce more individuals than can survive to maturity. Along the way, some will die because they're eaten by predators, some will die of disease, some just aren't fit enough to survive. And the individuals that have good genes are more likely to survive. This is what selection is. Some individuals survive longer and reproduce more than others do. And so they are passing down those good genes. And this overall leads to adaptation, evolution, that those traits survive and become more common in the population. Evolution and natural selection are not the same thing. Evolution is tracking changes over time, and natural selection is the event in which determines what traits survive in this moment. Both of these involve chance and sorting. Those new genetic variations arrive by chance, and then the environment sorts good versus bad based upon which individuals make it to adulthood and reproduce. Natural selection must occur before evolution can take place, but it will lead to adaptive evolution, a particular type of change that makes the organism better suited for the environment it's in. When natural selection is occurring, there are 3 modes or patterns it can exhibit. Be able to recognize directional, disruptive, and stabilizing changes. In directional selection, one genotype, one extreme is favored above all else. In disruptive selection, both the extremes are favored, while the heterozygous form is suppressed. And in stabilizing selection, the intermediate heterozygous form is the most beneficial, and the 2 extremes are suppressed. Here we see the 3 patterns of selection depicted. In the first, we can see the original population as a solid red line, and we're seeing evidence of directional selection as that bell curve shifts towards darker and darker mice. In the second panel, we see disruptive selection, where the white and black extreme phenotype mice are depicted, but the brown tawny mice in the center dip down. And in the third scenario, we see stabilizing selection, where there's almost no white or black mice, but many, 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 many more brown mice. Where natural selection is taking place, we will see changes in the frequency of alleles, where those good traits will occur more commonly. And this will lead to the adaptive evolution of the organism, making the organism a better match to the environment it's in. This is a continuous process because the environment can change, and so adaptive evolution will move towards better fitting and then move back and to address the new change and then move back. It's not stagnant. Mates have choice as well. Sexual selection is where mates choose for reproductive success. And where sexual selection is strong, it can result in sexual dimorphism. This means marked differences between males and females of that type. Sexual preferences explain the occurrence of traits that have no actual survival advantage. Comical depiction. A peacock with beautiful plumed feathers and tail would stand out, unable to camouflage, and be easier to catch, much easier prey, than a male peacock that looked like the brown and tawny and smaller peahen. And yet we see this beautiful plumage maintained generation after generation, and the female selecting for peacocks with even more beautiful and more extravagant tail feathers. They have a marked preference, a mating selection. We also see an interesting thing, a pattern. Where dimorphism exists, we see competitive and short-term mating strategies occur more frequently, meaning that if male and females look markedly different, there's more competition between the genders, more competition among the genders, and the more promiscuous their partnering are. Meanwhile, where sexual dimorphism does not exist, when the males and females look almost identical, varying only slightly in size, their mating strategies tend to be more monogamous. They'll stay together as one mating pair for the entire season, or sometimes even life. There's less pressure, there's less temptation elsewhere. Some good examples of monogamous species are swans, voles, wolves, termites, worms, bald eagles. If you look at an animal and can't discern if it's male or female, chances are it has a monogamous mating strategy. But if you look at an animal and can distinctly tell the biological male versus the biological female, chances are it's competing to be the biggest, baddest, sexiest peacock on the block. That competition can take two forms, intrasexual or intersexual. Know the difference between these two. Intra means within, among individuals of one sex. Inter means between. This is competition between the genders. So intrasexual selection describes when males of one species compete to be the biggest, baddest male on the block and then have their pick of the litter. Whereas intersexual selection describes a situation where males showcase their skills and it is the female who's choosy and gets to pick their mate. Because it's a continuous process, we want to preserve variation overall. We don't want to lose old traits entirely, because should the environment change back, it's imperative that there be some old traits around to enable survival. In watching mating strategies and tracing generations over time, we've noticed a good genes hypothesis arise. The idea here is that if a trait is related to health, preference will align to that. So beautiful tail feathers may not have an advantage for surviving against a predator, but the vibrant colors of that tail indicates good eating, good hunting and gathering skills. And so female preferences lead towards the showier peacock feathers because it indicates this male can provide and is possibly faster or more cunning to avoid the disadvantage of being a neon flashing buffet line. There are no perfect organisms. In the history of the earth, not one organism has been created perfectly. It's because selection can only act on the existing variations. what's available right here and now. Evolution is limited by historical constraints. There might have been better genes way back in the day, but if a bottleneck event occurred or an asteroid hit and destroyed millions, taking that trait with it, it may or may not come back through random mutation. Oftentimes, these adaptations are compromises, like a heterozygote advantage. Not ideal, but it does solve the immediate problem at hand. And it's important to note that chance plays a big role in this.